From Juliana Pena going to jail on 2 counts of assault to Randa Marcos seeing 7 imprisoned prisoners executed while imprisoned in Baghdad. Many female UFC fighters have violent pasts. Let's get into it, starting with none other than Pena. She's known best for being a former bantamweight champion, but the Venezuelan vixen has a dark past. In December 2015, she was arrested. If you're wondering why, she was charged with 2 counts of assault in Spokane. Apparently, Juliana was caught up in a bar fight that escalated very quickly. Cops were called to the scene at a bar in downtown Spokane and ended up arresting the MMA artist, along with another person. Pena was allegedly seen kicking multiple men in the groin right outside Zola's bar. Juliana was with her training partner, Josh Gao, when the whole thing went down. They were coming back from a street fight with 20 people near Globe Bar and Kitchen. Gao's face was covered in blood, and the pair had to find a place to get cleaned up. That's when they headed to Zola's. Unfortunately, the employees at the bar weren't letting them enter, and that's when things got heated. The Venezuelan vixen got extremely irritated and ended up kicking 2 employees in the groin. Ouch! That's when the police were called. When the officers first came up to her, Juliana Pena was sober enough to identify herself as a professional fighter. The police department ended up arresting her at around 2 a.m., and she was booked into the local county jail around 3. Thankfully, the UFC fighter was in jail for barely a few hours because she was released on $2,000 bail the same afternoon.
Fire everyone, build a new gym, and start from the ground up. And I just want that same opportunity to be able to change some things, go back to the drawing board, and kind of solidify my name and my legacy in this division and in the UFC.
When the news was released on social media back then, everyone was insane. It was definitely a huge deal that Pena went to jail for actually fighting another person outside of the octagon. Even though the scandal was huge, Juliana Pena didn't comment on it right after it happened. The UFC, on the other hand, let everyone know that they were investigating what exactly went down. If Pena was outside of Spokane, things could have gone way worse.
It was actually a little bit easier than I had anticipated initially. But yeah, no, you can't let the media or all the fans and stuff get in your head. You kind of just got to go in there and trust in the process of what you put in.
According to the city's law, the maximum a person can be fined for assaulting somebody is $5,000, and they can only be in prison for a maximum of 364 days. It's clear that Juliana has changed her ways, though. Back when she was arrested, she was only 26. She's grown a lot since then, from being the first female winner in Tough to having an insane 12-5-0 record. She's a force to be reckoned with. I mean, how else do you explain being number 1 in the bantamweight rankings, as well as being number 6 on the list of the UFC women's pound-for-pound rankings? She brings the heat to the outside of the octagon as well as the inside. While there aren't a lot of UFC fighters who've been to jail, a lot of them have their fair share of troubled pasts, as Randa Marcos happens to be one of them. Known as Quiet Storm, it doesn't look like she fears anything, at least when she steps into the octagon. Honestly, though, I think nothing can scare her, especially when you think about all the things she's been through in her life.
I just consider myself, blessed to have been through something so difficult and come out strong. And I just want to be represent all the women in the Middle East and women out there who have struggled. Just believe in yourself and follow your dream.
While most fans know Marcos as a fighter in the strawweight division, there's so much more to her story. The Iraqi-Canadian fighter has gone through a lot in her life. No wonder she feels like she can overcome literally anything. Randa was born in Baghdad during the Gulf War, and as a result, her country wasn't the safest place to be. Her family was trying to find a way to escape all the dangers of Iraq, and they finally made it to Canada after some very difficult times. Randa's father was a man in the military and would have been forced to serve in the war. Back then, the fighter said her dad knew that if he continued in the military, he was going to die. He decided he didn't want to put his family through all that and knew that fleeing the country was the best decision. Leaving a war-torn land that you called home definitely wasn't easy, and most of us can't even imagine what that's like. Marcos, her mother, and her siblings had to be separated from their father and ended up going to Turkey. Here, they were imprisoned in a camp. The sad part is that all this happened because the camp was on the hunt for her father, and yet a 3-year-old Randa Marcos was suffering for it. Even though she was really young, Quiet Storm has been open about how horrible things were at the camp. Her family even saw 7 prisoners executed right in front of their eyes. That's just insane to think about. Randa and her family ended up escaping soon after, thanks to an aunt in Canada. She arranged for their visas, and they moved to Windsor, Ontario, Canada. The MMA star has spoken openly about how her family's tough past has helped her become the fighter that she is. It's her motivation motivation to do as well as she can. No wonder she makes the best use of her 63.5-inch reach and powerful legs. Of course, you can't forget how talented she is when it comes to using a combination of jiu-jitsu and wrestling. That's the deadly combo she used to win 6 of her first 10 career mixed martial arts fights. It's crazy to think about how far she's come since The Ultimate Fighter. Speaking of people who've come far, Ronda Rousey is definitely one of them. She became the face of female UFC fighters at one point, but this didn't mean that everything was perfect all the time. In fact, Rousey was jailed after getting into a brawl with Becky Lynch and Charlotte Flair. This was definitely one of those moments that all three of them won't ever forget.
When you're fighting them.
Well, not always, almost.
Always. But I mean, almost, if they don't say the right word, their arm's getting broken.
Well,
So I mean,
if they say anything, that's called a verbal submission, so you can have any safety word you want.
Rousey, Flair, and Lynch were involved in a very serious brawl right before WrestleMania. They were supposed to fight a 6-woman tag team match, going up against the Riot Squad. Everyone was ready to unleash hell on each other. But when Liv Morgan tapped out because of Rousey's armbar, things went south. Saying that things went south would actually be an understatement. The three fighters just completely lost it, and things were bordering on assault. They just couldn't stop, at least until WWE guards intervened and held them back. The guards were also in for a surprise, though, because then all three women started beating up security and ended up restarting their brawl. Imagine that.
I don't think I could beat that record, but, you know, I can't just let it lie. I gotta do something cool. So as soon as I knew my due date, I was like, you know what, I bet I could come back and win the Royal Rumble and go to WrestleMania within that time frame.
WWE security guards definitely don't get paid enough for things like that to constantly happen. Once everyone realized that this wasn't an ordinary fight, the actual police had no choice but to get involved. Officers stepped into the ring and had to stop all the chaos. At first, the fighters fought back even when the police came, but they stopped when they were handcuffed. The situation was pretty intense, but it's fair to say that this was the funniest possible ending to any Raw. In the end, the cameras cut to Ronda and the other two being escorted into a car with handcuffs on, but it was clear they still had some fight left in them. Lynch and Rousey were still going at it, kicking each other. They were out of control, shattering car windows left and right. By the time they escorted Lynch out to another vehicle, Flair had joined in. Then the two of them started going at it with one another again. It's like they could have gone on forever. In the end, Ronda Rousey drove the car she was in without using her hands and knocked over the police car right in front of her. Oh, and did I mention that while the cops were loading Lynch into the police car, Flair hit Rousey with one of the most legendary knee shots ever. The whole thing was wild, and the night ended with Ronda Rousey going to jail. She even posted her mugshot on Instagram. Thankfully, WWE got her out right before the biggest performance of her career at WrestleMania just 6 days later. That's all I have for all the female UFC fighters who have been to jail.